Ed, and thanks again for joining us this morning. For everybody's benefit, Ed is a animator, a computer animator, but I'm not going to spend too long talking about the nature of his work because he's far more qualified to do it himself. So I will hand immediately over to him. Just to say, Ed, the people we have with us today are two groups of Year 10 artists and several members of staff. Some of the students have already armed me with questions which we can come to later on, but perhaps we'll have some time at the end to build in some capacity for them to ask some questions as well. But
okay, fantastic, great. Just noted a bin lorry's just pulled up outside my house, so hopefully it's not too noisy. But yeah, we'll crack on. So hello, my name's Ed. I am the animation director at Kellebec Media. I was going to briefly run you through some of the roles in which I've been involved in over the last sort of, I guess, about 15 years now. So I've done roles from actually animating, which is kind of breathing life into the characters, so effectively acting as the sort of the puppeteer really for a character or an object within the scene, or anything that might move within the scene. So that's kind of a basic rundown of what an animator does. I've worked as a CGI modeler, which is basically, it's kind of most similar to sculpting really. So that could be kind of sculpting a character or a prop or a kind of whole kind of set environment, as we call them. Also more kind of generally as either a designer or what we call within the industry a generalist, so someone who puts their hand to lots of different aspects of production. So that could be a lighting artist, an animator, a modeler, someone who has various different roles. More recently, I've been in more senior positions, so animation supervisor on a production in Cardiff, where I oversaw a team of animators working on a kids' TV production, and also actually now moving into directing. So that is basically overseeing the whole process and all the different elements of that, which is a great position to be in, but what you really need is lots of good people to make you look good really within that position. So it's useless being a brilliant director if you haven't got anyone good underneath you. So yeah, so those kind of a brief rundown of the types of roles in which I've been involved in. So the types of work I've done, mainly I've worked in TV, in kids TV, but I've also worked in adverts. I've worked in augmented reality, which is a bit like virtual reality, but kind of within the real world. I guess Pokemon Go is probably the best example of that, if you're familiar with that game. What else? Oh, also, I've not actually worked in any films yet, but we're in development with of a feature film with Rod Minkoff, who is one of the original directors of The Lion King, Disney's The Lion King, so the original one back in the 90s. So that's kind of extremely exciting for us at Kellebec at the moment. So we're kind of very early stages of kind of pulling together teams and composers and various different people, and then thinking about trying to kind of raise the funds for a kind of something, and then move on to talk about kind of how many productions that I've kind of worked on and what sort of broadcasters. So I've worked on probably around 7 TV productions.
Wow.
For the BBC, for ITV, for Channel 5, National Geographic, from kind of preschool kids TV through to kind of photoreal kind of dinosaur documentaries from National Geographic. So a kind of a good variation, but I'm very much more specialised within within kids TV, and that's kind of where I sort of found my niche. So I thought now I'd show you my show reel, which is not completely up to date, but it gives you a good flavour of kind of the sort of work that I've been involved in. So I'll attempt to start sharing my screen now. Oh, it's saying that
I have to change that again, don't I?
Okay.
Before we dive into that, Ed, can I ask a question just based on what you've just said to us? So we've got a room of 14-year-olds virtually around us who, to a greater or lesser extent, are all interested in art, one way or another. When you can I ask a personal question? When you were 14 and you were sat in an art class, did you know or see your route to where you are now?
No. Well, this is something that I was going to touch on later, but very much not. I always knew. So I started off kind of drawing cartoons and what have you with my brother when I was very young. So knew that I was kind of quite good at drawing and quite good at art, but never really saw it as a career prospect. And it was only until I moved school. So I used to live in the Midlands, and then I moved down south to Somerset. And I was asked to take an extra GCSE, and I thought, well, I'll do art, because I'd kind of sort of mapped out roughly the subjects I thought I should do. And I thought, well, art would be really kind of nice to have subject, because I knew that I enjoyed it and I knew that I was quite good at it. So yeah, I really didn't kind of see it as a kind of career prospect. But then kind of fast forward a few years, when I got to A level, basically all of my A level subjects that I took were all art based, because I was much better at art than anything else. So yeah.
So, but by the sound of it, it was your enjoyment of the subject that drove that decision, as opposed to a real understanding of, oh, it's going to take me here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, I think so. I knew I did know an animator. So when I grew up, there was an animator that I knew that directed Rupert and the Frog Song. So Rupert the Bear. So he's a kind of a close family friend. So I did know kind of people did work within that industry, but just it wasn't really something that I thought myself was kind of possible. So yeah, it was just a matter of kind of just enjoyment of it and kind of getting obsessed with it, kind of really getting obsessed with art, probably about the age of sort of 17, really kind of honing into fine art. And then kind of the opening up of the Tate Modern kind of really clicked something with me, because I was probably about 17 years old. I think I went within the first year. And just to be able to see those artists work, because we had kind of good art galleries in England before that, but the Tate Modern really was something that kind of really expanded on your ability to be able to see these kind of great works of art by Dali and Rothko and Francis Bacon and various other artists that wasn't really possible on that scale before.
That's interesting. So that idea that actually we should feed off the work of artists, even if we don't perhaps initially see the importance of them, is okay. I guess that's useful for the guys that are here today. Sorry, I completely threw you off your
that's all right. No worries.
Okay, I'll let you go.
So shall we? I'll show you my show reel now. Then I guess. Can I? Yeah, I can start sharing. So I will. Hopefully, you can now see that. So this was the first kind of kids TV show that I was involved in, mainly kind of modeling props and environments. This is an augmented reality company I work for, and then this was actually the first job I had within the industry, so working on kind of photoreal dinosaur documentaries. An example of a Ben and Jerry's advert I worked on a few years ago, which was quite good fun. You can see at the bottom of the screen, it will kind of let you know my kind of role within it. So animation and a bit of kind of sculpting, and also kind of putting the bones into the characters to be able to make, so you can actually animate them. This is a series that I don't think has gone into production. We were kind of trying to get it off the ground with a company in Cornwall called Spider Eye. This is another advert that I did, which is quite good fun. A kind of a lot of different sort of effects going on. And this is Whisper. So we did this at Kellebec. So I was assistant director on series 1 and then co-director on series 2.
Then why don't we record something Greek?
This is more advert work. So I've done lots of stints in between productions as a freelancer. This is kind of more advert stuff as well. So it's kind of how I earn my living outside of production generally when I haven't got a permanent job.
Wow.
And this is Rough Tweet and Dave, which was a BBC production. Here's some student work. So this goes back to my time at Bournemouth. So yeah, doing my masters. This is kind of a collaborative project I did with a few others. More dinosaur stuff to finish, and that's it. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So yeah, I thought I'd start to talk about kind of home in on Whisper, which is the last production that we did at Kellebec, and kind of give you a brief breakdown of some of the things that we might be involved in, kind of as a kind of really simplified kind of breakdown of the production. But I'll talk a little bit about Whisper. Sorry, I'm looking down so much, but I've kind of got notes here. So we've done 2 series of Whisper. Whisper's been a kind of hugely successful show, sold into over 100 countries, so broadcast in over 100 countries. We produced 104 episodes, and to kind of give you an idea of how long and how much work kind of goes into each episode. So this is kind of after you've developed the look and the feel of and even kind of come up with the concept of the show, which kind of can take years, but actual kind of development of a show is kind of anywhere between sort of 6 months to a year prior to kind of full production. So, but when we're in full production, Whisper, I think there's 7-minute eps. So you'd probably have about 6.5 minutes of actual new animation. So to produce one of those, you would be looking at 1 to 2 weeks, with about kind of anywhere between sort of 50 to 100 artists working on that. So you can kind of really get an idea of how many people are involved in the process and how much work actually goes into those kind of 7 minutes of kind of broadcast animation. So I thought I'd now jump into actually showing you a breakdown. So I'll share my screen again. So this is basically what we've done here is we started storyboarding. Initially, we get everything scripted. So we start off with the scripts. The idea for the actual episodes. Then we take that into the studio, and we get the actors to do the voiceovers on it. So that's kind of really where the characters start to come to life, is with the actors kind of doing their voiceover on top of it. So it kind of really gives the animators and the storyboard artists something to kind of grab hold of from their actual kind of performance. So the first bit of kind of real performance comes into it kind of at that point. Then we move into what you can see here is a storyboard, and then we kind of put that storyboard, we give that storyboard to a timeline effectively, and then kind of edit that. So we give it to our editor, and then pull that into some, usually they kind of go a bit over length, but we have to kind of pull in the story, so make sure everything's working well. So I'll play through this and it'll give you an idea of kind of how much work's involved in a storyboard.
Don't worry, Whisper. I think it's going to rain in a few minutes anyway. Something's up, Peggy. Listen. I can hear rumbling.
Is anybody there?
I'm Whisper.
Hello?
I can talk to you. You okay, Bert?
What? Yes, of course. Perfectly fine.
Is that your new den? Can I see?
No, something's down there. It sounds pretty fierce. Best stay away. It could be dangerous.
Oh.
Not that I'm frightened, obviously.
Scary.
So I'll stop it there, because we probably don't want to do the full 7 minutes. But as you can see there, it's kind of a very sort of simplified version of the show, but you can really start to see what's going to be involved in the actual episode.
Yeah.
And it gives the animators an understanding of where they need to go. So what I'll do now is I will show you the next stage in the process. Let's make this a bit bigger, which is the animation. So this is a kind of very simplified view of it. There are other steps in between. We need to kind of go to what's called layout, where we pull in all the assets into those sets. So I think the best way of thinking about it is if it's kind of like a miniaturized little set within CGI. So we have lights, and we have cameras, and we have props, and we have the characters which we drop in. So we bring everything into that scene, as well as the camera, and we match that to the moving storyboard, which is the animatic. And then the animators do their bit, so they really start breathing life into the characters here. So I'll play this through.
Oh. Uh-oh, I'll fill it up again. Don't worry, Whisper. I think it's going to rain in a few minutes anyway. Something's up, Peggy. Listen. I can hear rumbling.
Is anybody there?
I'm Whisper.
Hello?
I can talk to you. You okay, Bert?
What? Yes, of course. Perfectly fine.
Is that your new den? Can I see?
No, something's down there. It sounds pretty fierce. Best stay away. It could be dangerous.
Oh.
Not that I'm frightened, obviously.
Okay, so you can see there that everything's moving a lot better. You've got much more of an idea of the kind of the finished product here, but there are still lots of things that haven't been added. There's no music, there's no effects, and you can see the image is a kind of very kind of low res kind of draft. image that you kind of see here, which is kind of what we used to animate within. So this is what the animators would see. And to kind of, but you start to get an idea because everything starts to get coloured as well here. So the kind of, say, what we call the texturing is done in pre-production, which is basically the colouring and adding all the texture. You can see even on this kind of fence panel, there's a huge amount of work that goes into every single little bit of aspect that you see. But yeah,
sorry, Ed, on the animation team, the guys that are directly involved in this stage of it, how many of you are there? I mean, Jensen.
There's more. I would say there's probably more animators than there are anything else. So it can vary. So on this production, we oversaw. So this is a kind of it was a what we call a co-production of various different studios. So this is an Indian studio that were doing the bulk of the animation work and the actual production work, and we were overseeing it. So we were directing it, and also initially kind of creating quite a lot of the characters in-house, which we would send over and initial. So we'd probably do about 50% of the initial work in terms of creating the environments and what have you. But in terms of how many animators that were on it, it's difficult to tell. I probably would say that you probably have about 30, I would imagine.
Wow. Okay. I ask only because, you know, there are a couple of contributions in the chat already about questions about how much capacity there is for people to work in 2D in animation. You know, how many jobs are there essentially? Jensen's now asking about, because Jensen clearly is really excited about the possibilities in animation. He's quite an able artist and is really particularly interested in that field. So that's why he's asking the most questions, I suspect. But there is. So asking about 2D. Yeah, go on.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've kind of worked. I've mainly worked in CGI, but we have. I started off as a 2D artist and have more recently come back to that with Kennebec. Yeah. But yeah, there are a huge amount of jobs within the industry. I think I've got a stat here where I think it's from 2016. I did get it off the internet from a relatively reliable source, but they're saying that there's about, in the UK, there's about 8,000 artists employed by the animation industry. I think that's the visual effects industry.
Right.
But there's an extended chain of people like composers and actors and whoever else. So there's, I think that extended chain goes to something like 17,500. But that's obviously relatively kind of outdated stats. And the industry has been growing and growing over X amount of years. So yeah, there is a huge amount of work.
The talent is here, no doubt.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so I will go on to the next stage. So here we see, this is basically the finished product. So what you're going to see here is everything lit. We've added all the lights and the shadows to it. Let's move on to a frame so I can actually talk to it. So you can see the image looks a lot more kind of high quality here. And then you can see here there's kind of the water effects that started to be added. So that's a whole department. So you have you've got lighting artists, you've got texture artists, you've got effects artists, you've got even the people who pull in all the, because what we call rendering. So we basically, it comes from, I guess, when you render a pot, it's the kind of the finishing process. So effectively what you do once you've got everything in, you capture that frame in very high quality. Basically, that's really what it means. But we separate that into lots of different layers, so we have control over all these different elements, so we can kind of bring up the contrast or balance out things within that. So we have a team of compositors as well, so they kind of knit everything together. And also you'll see here, or you'll hear here, there's been music added. So you'll have a composer or a few composers actually creating specific music for this episode, as well as we call Foley artists. So they create all of the sound effects. So any kind of sort of, even kind of rustling in material, or kind of, I don't know, footsteps or more obvious sounds, and even kind of bird song or whatever that you might hear, kind of more environmental sounds. So there's a huge kind of layering process here, and this is kind of, I'm showing you a very brief kind of squashed down version of that, which is kind of doing it a reasonable amount of injustice, but otherwise it would take far too long. So let's play through this.
Ice Monster Dragon. Our food's up again. Don't worry, Whisper. I think it's going to rain in a few minutes anyway. Something's up here. Listen. I can hear rumbling.
Is anybody there?
Oh, Whisper, I can talk to you. Oh, you're okay, Bert?
What? Yes, of course. Perfectly fine.
Is that your new den? Can I see?
No, something's out there. It sounds pretty fierce. Best stay away. It could be dangerous.
Oh.
Not that I'm frightened, obviously.
Okay, so that's kind of it from what I was going to actually sort of show you, which, as I said, is just a very kind of brief knockdown version, and there's lots of different kind of processes within that, and at Calibec we basically oversee all of those kind of different processes. So yeah, I thought now I would talk briefly about my kind of career path, then we can move on to a bit of a few questions. So so I kind of touched on it earlier, but when I was probably about kind of 5 or 6 years old, I started drawing lots of cartoons. I kind of got very interested in kind of the Beano and Dandy and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that kind of stuff from the 80s. So just kind of really copying comic books, and just kind of copying how other people do stuff. And that kind of just sort of sparked I mean, everyone draws obviously from kind of a very young age, but yeah, it kind of really just kind of cemented my kind of interest in kind of pencil and paper, really. And as I spoke about earlier, I moved school and took a GCSE in art, which was kind of almost kind of an unexpected kind of bit of a treat, really, to be able to kind of to do that. And I don't know whether it was so much of a pressure from my parents or whatever, but my parents were always very kind of open to allowing me to do what I wanted to do. Sure. But initially I saw myself as a teacher, and thought that was probably my route. As I became more and more kind of interested in art, and realised that through my teachers' encouragement, from other people around me, that maybe art was a good kind of avenue to go down. So I think we talked mainly about kind of how I became more and more kind of interested in fine art in particular, So then, as I kind of came out of, so I took at A level, I took media studies, fine art, drawing and painting, and also a kind of quite a general kind of design technology course. So all very kind of creative subjects. And then after that, I thought the next natural step for me was to do an art foundation, which I'm not quite sure whether that still is a route which people take. I presume it is, because it's just kind of a good broad base onto kind of it. Basically, there's lots of different disciplines. What we did throughout our art foundation was kind of just through each term you would select a field in which you might want to look at, and then you finalise in something. So I finalised in illustration because there was no animation role there. So, and then after that point, I thought, well, really, what I really wanted to do was somehow marry my kind of interest and love for film and media studies with kind of my art and my fine art. So I thought animation would be a really good subject to take at university. So I went to Southampton Solent University and took, I think it was just called animation, which is a kind of a very sort of classical course at the time. In terms of, I mean by classical, it literally was pencil on paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of the old school way of animating. Now it's very different. Usually there are still productions made like that. Obviously, if you think of stuff like the more recently kind of the Snowman and the Snow Dog, and still a lot of Disney productions are done like that. But the majority of stuff is kind of built beforehand. Even if it's 2D, you actually kind of build the characters, and then you kind of rig them so you enable them, their kind of arms and their legs and their mouths and whatever to be kind of so the artist can pop from one mouth pose to another mouth pose and be able to move their arms and legs. So almost like a puppet, basically. You kind of create a puppet from that without actually having to draw every single frame.
Yeah.
So I kind of came out of university, still very green really, and not really having that much of a grasp on the industry. I think it's a lot better now. I think universities are a lot better now at sort of pushing people towards a career really. So I moved to Bristol after graduating. And what I really did was just go and pester a huge amount of people with my showreel, my hard copy of my showreel in my hand, and went and knocked on a load of doors. I literally just looked through kind of animation directory at the time. I don't think they do it anymore, but I guess the internet is a good enough source these days to find out where all these different kind of animation studios are. And I literally went there with a card copy in my hand and would go and knock down the door, or I'd send an email and ask to sit down and chat with these people, glean a bit of experience from them, even if it's a sort of a 10-minute chat, and just to kind of show them my work. So after spending a huge amount of time doing that, I got a couple of internships. So that was where it's kind of almost a bit like, I guess, work experience, but more, these were kind of longer roles where you probably learn a bit more, and you're not actually working for them. You're just kind of learning about the industry really. So after doing probably about 6 months of that sort of stuff. I think I was 4 months at a company called 422 in Bristol, who are a visual effects company, probably best known for their kind of documentary style stuff, as well as I guess they're quite famous for Blue Planet. They did back, I think when that was, I guess that was in the noughties sometime, the David Attenborough Blue Planet. So he did a lot of the visual effects on that. So still quite far from where I wanted to go and considered myself wanting to be, because I always wanted to be in cartoons, really. But anyway, so I was offered a job there as a junior animator. Worked there for a year. You saw some of the clips of the dinosaur stuff. So that was brilliant. Really, really kind of met a huge amount of people that influenced me and kind of really took me under their wing and showed me the tricks of the trade, really. But it was a very steep learning curve. I had to prove to the boss, really, that I could animate within CGI, which was a difficult thing for me to do. Things all I'd done was pencil on paper, so even I was so kind of untech savvy, it was unbelievable. But so yeah, as long as you've got those skills, those fundamental skills, I was able to convert them into the computer, and then prove to him that I was kind of worth employing. So spent a year with them. I then decided that because of the software's so advanced, that I really wanted to learn more about CGI specifically, 3D animation specifically. So what I did is I started my MA in Bournemouth, where I stayed in Sandy's caravan in her back garden. Miss Wright, I guess you know her as. So literally didn't have any money whatsoever, and I'm sure Sandy will remember kind of all I really did was just spend 99% of my time at university from literally 10 o'clock in the morning till sometimes 2 o'clock at night, working my socks off for a whole year. But that kind of really, really paid off. And then 2 weeks after graduating, so I moved back to Bristol, and then about 2 weeks later, I was offered a job in London on a production called The Hive, which was the first thing on my show reel that you saw with a kind of little bee flying through the environment. So that's a kids' TV show. And since then, I kind of never really looked back. I've had kind of stints where I've kind of come off of production, and then I've always found that I've had enough contacts and enough sort of experience to be able to just kind of find little bits and pieces of work to keep me ticking along until the kind of the next sort of production. But lots of people, I've got lots of friends that work as freelancers. Freelancers earn more money than someone that goes on to productions. I was kind of full-time in-house. And you get a huge kind of variation of different work. So I think that's one of the most important things I would say is to kind of really just try your hand at lots of different things, because I really found that specifically from my first job in animation, where I worked at 422 in Bristol, I really kind of discovered that being an actual animator and breathing life into these characters, it's really quite hard. And I decided that for me, I would rather vary my interest. So I would rather be involved in lots of different aspects of the industry rather than just hone my skills on one specific direction. So if you work for big production companies, quite often that's the case, is you're kind of the guy that, I don't know, does visual effects for smoke or whatever. So you're very much more specialized, and you really kind of become a master of your craft. But that's definitely not me. I'm much more of a kind of a jack of all trades. But that suits me, and you kind of have to discover that as an artist, what suits you and what you find kind of excites you. But I kind of always knew that I wanted to do animation. So I talked briefly about, because at one point I went into augmented reality. So that's kind of putting characters or animation basically into the real world through a device. So you might have a t-shirt or something. So we created a lot of t-shirts for a company called Zappa that I worked at. And you'd kind of have like an image of an alien or something on the front, and you'd look at it through your phone and the alien would burst out of someone's chest. So lots of kind of really quite fun, cool content, which I really enjoyed working for them. It was more kind of along the kind of the games. Most of the people who work there from the games industry, because it's a bit more that way skewed. But after working there for a year and a half, I really decided that what I really wanted to do personally was tell stories, really fundamentally. And what I was doing there was telling little snippets of stories, but really wanted to kind of get into character and kind of tell stories. So I think that's probably it for me talking. And if we want to go into doing any kind of questions from anyone.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Ed, very much indeed. We've had some questions along the way. Jensen's asked some questions. Molly asked a question about how long an episode might take to make, but I think you kind of covered that. What I'd like to do is go back to some of the questions that people had asked in advance. Charlie, who's in my year 10 group, she asked about inspiration for an idea and how long it takes to get from, having an idea to to that coming to a final production.
Well, it can take an awfully long time. So probably the best example I've got from a friend of mine who, funnily enough, I went on to work on this production. So a friend of mine, Andrew, had an idea for a chef, kind of a bit like Jamie Oliver, I guess, that wanted to kind of, because he could kind of see the food industry kind of growing and the way in which people kind of engage with food and what have you. So he thought it'd be a great idea to kind of centre a show around the chef.
Nice.
And I think it took him 10 years to get into production on it.
Right.
So it can take a huge amount of time. But then again, it could well take, I don't know, a year or two. So it really does just depend, and it kind of depends on what contacts that person has within the industry, as well as kind of how you kind of need to fit into a slot within. So I talked to you briefly, Stuart, on our first initial call about the industry and about how it sort of changed. So there's kind of traditional broadcasters who are sort of the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, but then obviously recently the whole landscape has shifted because you've got all of the video on demand coming in. So you've got Amazon, you've got Netflix, you've got various other different people coming in. So what happens there is basically, if you're on an original Netflix production, what they'll do is they'll buy your concept. I presume every deal is different, but usually they'll give you money to kind of develop that concept and then take it further. But a traditional broadcaster will only give you a very kind of small percentage usually of your money. So then you need to go and find that money. So you need kind of very good business people attached to animation studios to kind of make things happen, really. Because without the finance, obviously you can't move forward. So that sort of stuff is quite sluggish. But once you're actually kind of, if you've got people that are interested in it, then it can go quite quickly. And we've what you call optioned a series of books called Isadora Moon at the moment, and they're kind of hugely successful books. And what we're doing at the moment is trying to move that into animation. So we are looking for broadcasters and looking for finance to go behind that. So that's so we've kind of taken that concept without actually coming up with it from scratch. We've taken a successful concept, which we're more often than not, people are more likely to grab hold of something that is successful already and then take that to market. So that sort of thing can happen much quicker. So if you grab hold of a property like that, hopefully that will happen quicker. So
Thank you. Right, I'm just looking down at my list of questions again. So Clover's asked a really practical question, but you kind of answered it. Do you have an opinion? She's asked about uni and apprenticeships and which route should you go? You have answered that, but do you have a view on whether it's important for young people to pursue formal art education?
There's lots of different ways to educate yourself these days. I think it's I mean, personally, if I'm not still learning, I'm not still interested. So I'm constantly still learning, and then do tutorials online and what have you. And that's a very important kind of resources online. There are so many different kind of animation tutorials, or kind of paid for as well as free stuff on YouTube. And that's really quite an important resource, because you can effectively teach yourself how to do something out of your bedroom. But I would say personally, it's when you're at university in a studio, you learn off people, and I think that's really where that kind of creative spark is really kind of ignited and pushed much further, because otherwise you're working in relative isolation.
Bit like this, really.
Yeah. That's why this whole year has been so kind of difficult, really, on a kind of a creative from a creative point of view, because I haven't got my work colleagues right next to me, and we do a lot of these kind of chats over Skype, and this sort of resource is brilliant because you can talk to people face to face, but it's still not the same. So I would say that really kind of getting into a space, and there's lots of other things bolted onto the side of learning how to kind of to animate. So you have those practical animation classes, but you'll also learn how to do life drawing and all those kind of fundamental things that will teach you about the kind of the structure of everything that kind of comes into it. So yeah, I really believe that education is hugely important within that. Within my field. I mean, I was probably right at the start of degree animation courses. There weren't that many to choose from.
No.
And yeah, a lot of people who were slightly older than me were very kind of curious about understanding what these courses might
Yeah.
have taught you, because before that you went to university, did fine art, then you went to, I guess you probably went to a studio and learned how to start moving these characters if you were you were good at drawing. So I guess you'd learn more on the job.
It's a much bigger world, isn't it? It's the world of creativity, as we talked about, is so much bigger, and the opportunities are so much broader. My question, and I'm going to ask anybody else who's got questions, because I've been through mine. If there are any other questions, guys, you want to be putting those in the chat now. But my question, which is the one I've asked at the end of each of these interviews, is what do you think, as a practicing artist, is the intrinsic value of just doing art for the sake of it?
Really just the enjoyment of it. I think for me it's so therapeutic and just so enjoyable, in the same way in which playing football is, or going for a run, or all those other things that people might do. I think you'll probably understand this bit. When you get a bit older, you do more of these things because you have to abstract yourself from all of the other stuff that you've got going on, all the other worry. When you're a bit younger, you don't have quite as much of that. But really, it's just doing what you enjoy. And I think just for the sheer enjoyment of it, like playing music or whatever. I mean, it's just, I think, for the enjoyment of it and for what it kind of gives you in terms of a sense of just well-being.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay, guys, any more questions? Miss Smith, Miss Wright, Miss Teague, Miss Harris, got anything you wanted to add? Oh, okay, Jensen, right, what a surprise. Jensen's put another question in. How much do animators make in terms of money? There's a question straight.
I thought this one might come up. It really, really varies. So it varies from industry to industry. So I kind of almost piggyback off different types, smaller industries within the same kind of big umbrella industry. So if I'm working within advertising as a freelancer, my daily rate would be almost double that of what it would be actually within kind of TV production. But then you kind of got to balance that off the side of the fact that you might not be in as much work, but that's quite good. I mean, some people are very, very busy and will stay busy for a long time. Some people can kind of go, right, okay, I'll work 6 months flat out, earn as much money as I want, and then I'll go on holiday for 6 months and then come back to it at another point. So it really, really varies. I mean, I think I don't quite know, as that specifically as an animator, isn't it? It's very difficult to tell, really. I think
to be honest, I think you answered the question, because you said that there's a value in doing it that goes beyond money. And this is me dodging Jensen's question slightly.
Well, I'd like to think that there's more than enough to be comfortable on. I would say, if you're good at it, you can be probably very well off.
But it's clear you do it because you love it and you have a passion for it, and you have done for some time, and you've pursued it and gone for it. And I am absolutely positive that there are young people in this group that we're talking to now who feel the same way, or might not have felt the same way when we sat down and started talking, but now might be thinking, oh, that's maybe something I could do. And I think from that point of view, this is a hugely powerful talk that you've just given us. I'm going to look one more time at the chat bar and see if there are any more questions that people want to ask. Can they type fast enough is the question, really. And then I'll, you know, in the absence of those questions appearing, I'll just say a massive thank you, Ed. Really
That's
fantastic.
all right.
Thank you very much indeed.